The retirement of Joe Davis from World Championship play opened up another chapter in the history of the game. With the likes of Walter Donaldson and John Pullman waiting in the wings, machine gunner extraordinaire Fred Davis took centre stage.
"30 years separate these two quick-fire sequences, and although it's the end of Fred's illustrious career that we remember best, his story started 100 years ago when he was born in Chesterfield. It was at the family-run billiard hall behind the Lyceum Theatre in Whittington Moor that he might have learnt his craft, but it was the age gap to his older brother that defined his whole life.
There was a 12-year gap between Fred Davis and Joe Davis, but Joe never really taught Fred the game, and I don't think Joe quite understood Fred's demeanour about the game, because Fred used to laugh and be quite jovial about the game, where as far as Joe was concerned it was serious business. You didn't laugh and joke. And in the end he never thought that Fred would be good enough to be a professional. But as we all know, this wasn't the case.
Fortunately, Fred ignored his big brother's advice. After winning the English boys snooker title, he turned pro at 16 and won the Junior Professional Billiards Championship 2 years later. He was, however, growing frustrated with his declining eyesight.
As no one had been successful wearing glasses, I really thought that I would have to give it up. They were called sportsman's glasses. There's what they call an angling joint. It just enables, you know, you could fit them on, and you would tilt them back as far as they would go to the eyebrows, you know, and this would take away the rim from your line of sight.
Armed with his new glasses, Fred reached his first world final in 1940, losing a final frame decider to Joe, but he'd clearly established his credentials.
I always considered Fred one of the most outstanding snooker players you could ever wish to see anywhere. Fred's technique in the game was quite outstanding.
I'm sure he must have been an inspiration that I think is almost certain. Help? I'd query that. Because Joe never quite, in my earlier days, didn't approve of my attitude towards the game. I was possibly as determined as he was to be successful, but I approached it in a different way, which he misunderstood at that particular time. Later on, when I proved to him, without any shadow of doubt, that I could play, and that in fact it was possible for me to beat him, that he then realized that I had advantages that he hadn't thought of.
When Joe retired after his 1946 victory, a rivalry worthy of Henry and White was on the horizon. Canny Scott, Walter Donaldson and Fred Davis contested the next 8 finals.
I didn't win it until 1948. 1947, I was expected to win it. I played Walter Donaldson in the final, and he beat me, which was all against the trend of opinion. I was beaten very easily.
Fred beat Walter Donaldson in 6 subsequent world finals. The matches were quite often epic 2-week battles, best of 145 frame affairs. The desire to sell tickets, perhaps taking preference over the well-being of snooker. All of this with Joe's massive shadow undermining the professional standing.
Paving stones, usually made from concrete, but not if you were Walter Donaldson, who in 1955 famously dismantled his table and used the slate to pave his garden path. He'd retired to a life on his small holding, having probably decided that watching his cows was time better spent than staring at Fred Davis for 2 weeks every year.
Or perhaps he knew that a younger man was poised to take up the mantle as the next great champion. John Pullman holds a unique place in the history of snooker as a player who held the world title for 11 years. Unfortunately for Pulley, the statistics don't tell the full story. Aged 31, he first reached the world final in 1955, losing to Fred. Davis beat him again in the 1956 final to claim his 8th and last title. With Davis not defending in 1957, Pullman finally won the title at the third time of asking.
I didn't enter the championship after that because most of the leading players, other than John Pullman, had retired from the game. John won the championship and actually won it out in Jersey, the Channel Islands. That was how bad things were.
Just as his star was in the ascendancy, interest in the game's showpiece event waned to an all-time low. Pullman had to resort to holiday camps like this one in Clacton-on-Sea to help make ends meet.
John Pullman must be considered the unluckiest snooker champion of all time because he won it in 1957, but then the game went into complete decline, mainly through television. People weren't going out to watch snooker matches anymore.
Nice action. Victory of John Pullman there, taking the blue and keeping himself in very nice position on the pink.
In fact, it wasn't until 1964 that he was challenged again by Fred Davis and for the world title, and he did beat Fred Davis for the first time. Subsequently, over challenge matches over the next 4 years, he was undefeated champion. He just accepted challenges from different players around the world. He went to South Africa, I believe, with Rex Williams and other challengers. But again, the game's still in decline until the new era of snooker in 1969.
Pullman's last successful defence came in 1968 with a 39-34 frame victory over the Australian newcomer Eddie Charlton. In 1969, the championship reverted to a knockout format and the modern era of snooker was born. The title holder lost to another emerging professional, Lancastrian John Spencer, in the first round. Pullman reached the final again in 1970, losing this time to another young gun, Welsh policeman Ray Reardon. Like John Pullman, Fred Davis continued to play to a surprisingly high level long after he had been eclipsed by younger players.
And he's restoring.
Fred reached 3 World Championship semi-finals in the 1970s, including the famous 1978 tournament, the first to be televised by the BBC, where he eventually lost to Perry Mans. He may have been past his prime, but Fred had not lost his touch with the snooker cue. His Crucible performances earned him a place in the audience's hearts forever. Fred Davis, a very special vintage.
In 1980, at the age of 67, Fred won the World Billiards Championship, making him still to this day the only other player besides his brother to have won world titles in both snooker and billiards. Retirement came soon after for both Fred and Pully, the last reminders of an almost forgotten pre-television age.